Welcome to the Pop Revolution, the show where we dive into a new song every month and show you how it was made from beginning to end, writing all the way to production. I'm your host, Nathan Larson, and I am very excited to jump into episode 5 of this month's series on Vesperum. Let's do this thing. If you enjoyed that little snippet but have not yet seen the music video or heard this tune, be sure to check that out right here. But you can also watch the most previous episode right here, and the links for all of the other episodes for this month are in the description below. I must say, I'm quite happy with how the guitars turned out in this tune. They certainly play a relatively subtle role for the most part until the jam section, where the electric guitar really does become the primary instrument. And I only used acoustic guitar for a very short little section at the beginning after the drums come in. So the majority of the guitars we're dealing with in this tune are all electric guitars. I truly love using electric guitar because there are literally endless opportunities with what it can do. You can use it for rhythmic drive, you can use it for melodies, you can use it for ambient effects, you can use it for swells, you can use it for arpeggiated sections, you can use it for catchy riffs. Okay, you get it. There's a lot you can do with electric guitar. So for me, like many of you, I do not have thousands upon thousands of dollars to spend on new gear. This is one of the reasons why we do these episodes, to show you that you don't need to have ridiculously pricey equipment to make good music. As a result of this, my electric guitar is not a 60s Telecaster or something awesome like that, as much as I dream about it. Instead, I use an Anthem, which is literally not even manufactured anymore. It's not a great sounding guitar, it has pretty bad intonation issues, and it does not have the most wonderful neck to play on. Why am I saying all of this? Because when you listen to this recording, at least for myself, I personally am not thinking, well, that guitar sounds like crap. It doesn't sound like a couple $100 guitar, but yet it is. And I'm also not running my guitar through a super nice Orange or Marshall or Fender amp. I'm running it through completely simulated amps and pedals using Native Instruments Guitar Rig plugin. So, though having really awesome gear is totally a huge plus, don't get worked up if you don't have super nice gear right at this moment. Really, don't believe the people who say it's the gear that makes your recordings sound better. It's just simply not true. In fact, my studio is quite bare bones. I have one SM58 mic and an Avantone CV12. That is it as far as mics go. Now, my Avantone is a killer mic, but it's not a $1,000 mic, it's a $500 mic. But it definitely has the character of a $1,000 mic. Now, I know you're probably thinking I don't have $500 for a nice mic, but don't worry about it. I was using a USB condenser mic for the first several years as I was getting into audio production in high school, and I was able to make it sound a lot better than it really did. And honestly, Shure SM58 and SM57s are great power horse mics and only cost about $100. Okay, enough about that little rant. Back to guitars. Let's just start with what the guitars are really accomplishing in this tune, and then we'll dive into how I got them to where they ended up in a bit. First off, in a style like this, I knew that having heavy guitars was simply not going to work. But I also know that electric guitar with the right sounds can be really effective in this style as a melodic instrument and also rhythmic, as long as it wasn't intrusive. I started out with the first time the drums and bass come in together and decided to create a counter melody to the piano part in the electric guitar. Here's what that sounds like with just guitar, bass, keys, and drums. As you can hear, it is simply playing eighth notes and playing a part that sounds pretty similar to the piano, but in a different register so it harmonizes with the piano at times. The main processors I used to create this sound were a clean amp in the Guitar Rig plugin, which is called Coolplex, which is also a very soft and mellow amp that doesn't give any kind of crunch. I also used a delay pedal, reverb pedal, and compressor. Here's what the guitar sounded like without any of these turned on. And that is where you can tell that the guitar I'm using does not actually sound that good at all by itself. Here's what it becomes when I turn on the effects I used. The delay I used gives a bit of a slapback kind of sound that really gets hidden when other instruments are playing, but it creates additional space and texture in the total mix. When you're working with delays, reverbs, EQ, and other plugins, don't simply listen to the instrument soloed out like this. You have to listen to the entire mix and see how it interacts with the mix as a whole. You don't EQ something because it sounds bad on its own. You EQ because it fits better in the mix that way. And a lot of times that means it will actually sound bad on its own. It isn't about things sounding good soloed out, it's about the total mix. So here's everything with the full mix. As you can hear, it blends in very well and is not intrusive. The other guitars I used in this section were rhythmic. I used 2 guitars panned hard left and hard right, doing the exact same part. Here's that with just rhythm section in those guitars. Now, as you can hear, it's really mirroring the bass guitar, but up the octave and doubled. The reason I doubled it is more of for the total effect it gives when listening with headphones or with 2 speakers. It makes the guitar sound a lot wider in the stereo image and more like they're surrounding you. This is also a trick you can use with bass guitar if you want a really wide sounding bass guitar, and I do use this quite frequently. A word of caution. If you do it too much, it will lose a lot of its effectiveness. A lot of times, I'll have one bass track in the center for certain sections of that song that aren't as big, and then for big sections, I'll split it off using 2 tracks panned hard to add depth to that particular section. It's in this same section that I use the acoustic guitar, which sounds a lot like this. You might notice that it sounds super thin. Again, it's about how it fits in the whole mix, not by itself. Especially with guitars, it's very likely that you're gonna end up having some guitars that sound very thin by themselves because they really would muddy up your mix otherwise. Do not pay attention to how they sound soloed out. It really doesn't matter. Again, what matters is your mix. I actually wanted a thin acoustic sound for this section because I knew I wouldn't need any more depth than I already had. First off, I used a studio reverb that was a medium to large studio size to add space. But then I also added a plugin in Guitar Rig called Stereo Tune, which is pretty much a chorus effect. I bumped up the spread so it sounded a bit more wide and adjusted the drift so that the pitch wobbled a little bit. Lastly, I bumped up the mix control until I liked how much the effect was altering the guitar. So again, here is that section quickly with the whole mix and focused on listening to the acoustic. It's very subtle, and the way I mixed it puts the acoustic much quieter in the mix, so it had a more textural sound than a really far up front sound. Let's jump ahead to the transition section. That same clean electric I used in the beginning is used here in a much different capacity. In the beginning, I had my pickup set to the neck in bridge setting, but in this section, I switched it to the bridge to add a bit more of a charge tone, and here that is. The delay I used is a dotted 16th note delay, which means when I play those notes palm muted, it's going to give the impression that I'm playing a lot more notes than I really am. This is a sound I really love, and I use it pretty much anytime I can because it sounds really intriguing and also fills up a lot of space. The rhythm electric guitars are doing exactly what they did before, doubling the bass in octaves. So here is that section all together. Finally, we get to the jam section. The lead guitar is essentially the same as the clean part, but using a different amp model to be more charged. In this case, I used a simulation of the orange amp, which in Guitar Rig is called Citrus. I also added a bit more compression to this track to really make sure it sounded well-rounded and energized. The rhythm guitars in this section finally break off and do something different than before. Each guitar ends up doing a completely different gesture. My left channel rhythm guitar is doing 8th note chords. And my right channel is doing half note strum chords. And all together, it sounds like this. And here is how it all sounds put together again. Well, there you have it. That's what we have going on for guitars in this month's tune, Vesperum. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all the cool new videos we're going to be putting out every single week. Our next episode is the last episode of this month, and then we get to dive into a completely new song. This next one is going to be a ton of fun to jump into, and we're also going to be featuring our first collaborative artist, Brittany Downey. She helped co-write the song and is also going to be singing on it. So there are a lot of really cool, exciting things coming up next month, but before then, we'll be wrapping it all up, talking about synthesizers and some final thoughts in our next episode on the pop revolution. Of course, if you have any questions or comments, leave those below in the comments section. And you can also buy this song on iTunes right here, so you can have it with you everywhere you go. And as I've said before, this goes a really long way in supporting us so we can keep making these happen and stuff. So, yep. Bye.